my experience, just like Jane did on the first night of the coup. It's very important for us as the people of Turkey to cross our messages to the international community in the best possible way. And therefore, I seek for permission to speak in English rather than Turkish, since my remarks will be already very known and familiar to the Turkish audience. On July 15th night, I was not in Istanbul. I was not in Ankara at a summer place, and actually was about to go out with my daughters and nieces, and then we heard of the coup. First, I did not realize what was happening. I thought, oh, good job. You know, there might be an ISIS group or something like that, and our soldiers are trying to protect us from this enemy, because that was like a week or so after the Atatürk airport massacre. And only a few weeks after what happened in France, Nice. So when you look at the sort of the spectrum of terrorism activities, I was thinking they had to block the Bosphorus Bridge just to protect us. Little we knew that that was not the case. And into the night, into the next morning, and I can't really remember how many hours that has been, I had done around 4 or 5 TV interviews with Canadian channel CBC, with several BBC at different times, BBC channels. One with Deutsche Welle from Berlin, Germany, and there was one more. As if they all agreed upon what to ask me, and this is around the time the president of Turkey was in the air. We don't know where he is. We don't know if he's gonna land to Istanbul or Ankara. And if he is okay. But we have heard that, you know, he has invited us to the streets. Almost they all agreed upon what to ask me. All of these Western media members were already calculating what would happen if this coup attempt would fail and Turkey would wake up to a morning with a more authoritative Erdogan. I was trying to explain to them, ma'am, they are dropping bombs on us. They are murdering civilians. They are dropping bombs and attacking with F-16s over the Turkish parliament. If we are not happy with a leader or a party in power, they are elected. It should be us who will decide to send them back home and elect a new government. They were using a sniper at the top of Bosphorus Bridge to kill civilians that night. So it was a total struggle, and of course misinformation, misconstrued information was hidden in the questions that Erdogan has ran away to Germany, and they had to again check my my statement at their studio with somebody else. Luckily, at the very moment as we spoke on air, Erdogan has landed to Istanbul. So who speaks for the Muslim in Turkey? Who speaks for the Turkish in Turkey? Still, we had to go back to a European to check the verification of that information. the veracity of that information. And immediately, a few hours into the night, the discussion became minimizing the effects of the coup attempt. I should not go in depth to the details of the coup day, but with this introduction, let me just say a few things on the traits of this organization. Was I surprised that they had done what they had done on July 15th? I think we all were shocked and surprised. But was I expecting them to be that evil? Maybe not. But hey, I have known this group for a very long time. I have observed this group for a very long time. I have spoken against this group for a very long time at different academic and political circles. And in line with their traits, I have to say they did not surprise me. But of course, to have a tendency towards this kind of violence at a mass degree was something that left me appalled, indeed. Sure, they come from the North Sea tradition, but we're not talking about the North Sea tradition, who was a fervent defender of Islam. However, he was anti-establishment, suffered under the practices of the coercive westernization project and the consequences thereof, as was already reiterated by the other speakers. He was, this movement was an esoteric movement, a political movement. The North Sea tradition promotes apolitical, bottom-up Islamization, or rather a revolution per se. Okay, this is where they stemmed within Turkey and in 1970s. I think 1970s, this time within which FETÖ burgeoned. He himself, the head of that organization, and his group burgeoned, is very critical to examine. Let's look at very quickly to the global context, regional context, and the local context. Global context, indeed, it's the Cold War, bipolar world, and then you have United States of America and its gladius, its extensions within different parts of the world to thwart, block any expansion of communist rule or ideology. And therefore, there are vicarious organizations at every facet of life, proxies, let's call them. And in the regional context, we have Islamic revivalism, 1970s, right? You look at Ikhwan, you look at Tunisia, Nahda, you look at Turkey. Yes, the local context also was very important. There was this Islamic political movement emerging, not just in Turkey, throughout the region. And do we think that a superpower or several superpowers would just stay still and not do something about that? To create, to push for an agenda that'll balance out these political movements. So the movement which also the JDP government has emerged from originally was started off in 1970s by Milli Nizam. This is the public face of Islam, political face of Islam, and therefore Islam, unlike what the modernization project promotes, might come very visible in the decades to come, and therefore there has to be some alternatives, alternative ways of Islam. Within that feta burgeoned in 70s and 80s and so forth. Traits that run across the board, and this is independent of time and space. Excuse me, these are my personal views, so I do not want to offend anybody when it comes to this, but some of these traits that we see today in all FETA members. You run into a FETA member in Indonesia, I tell you, the kind of language he uses, the mentality, the way his mind works, even the wording, his arguments vis-a-vis any issue, political, social, anything, would be very similar to that of the one you'll run in the street of Washington, D.C. No difference. And some of these traits, I have to say, also have to do with being a member of a community, let's say a tariqat, a Sufi group, maybe, that sort of sectarianism. Only my group is the good group. Just my group needs to be praised. That brotherhood within the group is so much prioritized and favored upon the larger group of the ummah that to be a FETA member, a follower or FETA, is almost maybe much more important and significant than being a Muslim in of itself. This is a cult. There was a nice article, I think, maybe on Daily Sabah, on how this is really a cult. The context within which it was born, and it flourished in a way that it justified its existence, was Kemalism, where we had marginalization of Islam, privatization of Islam. You want to call it secularization of Islam, and I want to call it de-Islamization of Turkish society. Within that de-Islamization process of the Westernization project of the Republican elite, this organization flourished. Some traits, it's pragmatist, it's a protein. It assumes the shape of any container you put it in. It changes color and shapes. It can present itself in very different contexts. It is Machiavellist. Do what you gotta do. You gotta do what you gotta do to praise your FETA, to abide by FETA commands. Don't stop there. As Machiavelli has suggested, maximize your power at all cost. At all cost. But at the same time, make sure you prevent others from gaining power. Other tariqats, other Sufi movements, other movements, political, apolitical, whatever. No. There is no space for anybody else but for FETA. I mean, one can think in terms of, with what we know right now, we can go ahead and make these examinations, evaluations, but in mid-1990s, I remember the political movement that I was working for in almost at the middle of 1990s. One would think, Islamic action or da'wah or amr bil ma'ruf nahy anil munkar is an enterprise. I hold a part of it from here. You as a Muslim, a concerned human being, you hold the other side, another part of it, and we all move together to serve this humanity, Muslim or not Muslim. But of course, there's an ummah consciousness, right, among us. But in the case of FETÖ, what you do is you backstab other Muslims. At all costs, you maximize your power. You work in a sectarian manner, you divide yourself from others, and you affiliate with yourself with this group affiliation of FETÖ. It's very goal-oriented. It is opportunistic. It was and it is. So that's why I say sometimes I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at some things that happen. This F-16s, bombs, mass murders, of course, I am very shocked. But they had in them this sort of this quality of doing evil to innocent people, because they are very goal-oriented. Opportunistic, take all opportunity to recruit, to propagate your ideas. Utilitarian, very utilitarian. In Kemalist context, they had the means, so to speak, up until 2002. Into that time, they didn't have to hide them. They had to hide themselves. The Kemalist context provided them the justification means. Okay, as a devout Muslim, as a practicing Muslim, I didn't like what they did. I found it very mind-boggling to turn against other Muslims. They may not agree with all political views, on all social issues, on economic issues. That's fine, but why to backstab Muslims? Why to side with the un-Islamic and anti-Islamic? Even in the minds of many devout Muslims, the justification was, well, they have to do that, you know. What to do? The Kemalist regime is just bulldozering all of us, stifling us all together. And therefore, it's okay. Maybe we don't do what they do, but there is a justification in what they do. So the Kemalism in of itself, I find to be a huge accomplice of July 15th coup attempt. Because they were the ones who pushed the Turkish society to hide their Islamic identities. These guys disguised themselves, concealed themselves within the military institutions, within the bureaucracy, because wearing hijab was not permitted, praying 5 times a day was not permitted, wearing a silver ring meant that you were a religious person avoiding using gold as mail. Not shaking hands with women was a marker of your backwardness within that society. Community of Muslims had to feel, well, that's not our road, but I guess it's understandable that these guys are disguising themselves. The process of recruitment, in that process of recruitment, they use different facades. I think this is one maybe contribution I can make as I wrap up my remarks, because I have lived in the United States of America for quite a bit of time, and was able to compare and contrast their actions here and in United States after 1999. I was based in Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania is not too far away, and I'm a political activist, and I was very active up on the Hill. And then you run into these people at the Congress. I go and give a speech at British Parliament. I run into FETA people there. And of course, once a politician, always a politician. Coming home at my summer visits, whoever I've found from my old colleagues at political circles, I was like, that's not okay. You know, what these guys are doing in the United States, are you guys aware of this? This is not good. And I see that, you know, JDP government was in line, sort of in a coalition with the followers of the FETA group at the time in 2002, because nobody knew. But I tried to bring this different perspective and give a warning about the Janus face of this group. They use different facades. When they go in somewhere, okay, it's the Nursi movement and the Fethullah Gülen readings that we hear about in Turkey. I'm assuming, I'm sort of like conjecturing, they landed to United States of America, and from my interactions with these people at political and academic circles, they did not impress me in any way. But they were teaching at George Washington University and Georgetown University and other circles. It's also very mind-boggling how they were so easily were accommodated by these Western universities. Coming out of Turkey with no prior experience. And looking around, what is it that works here? That is very popular in culture. They found out that it is Rumi that is popular in the United States. As he is called in Washington circles, Rumi. Our Mevlana Celaleddin Rumi and his poetry, somewhat cultural, somewhat social, a bit religious, but it's a mixture of things. And you go to a conference at Harvard University and it would open with a couplet from Rumi at the very beginning, right? So Americans are very familiar to Rumi readings. So they disguise themselves under the readings and teachings and the cultural artifacts, such as whirling dervishes, of Rumi. 10 books of Rumi, but under there, 20 books of Fethullah Gülen and his teachings. A cultural activity, so to speak. They use these, whatever this might work, if they went to India, it may not be that Rumi is very popular there, it might be something else. One should check on this, okay? So, I'm sorry? Oh, the Turkish Olympics, I'm not going into that. I'm sure that's a proverbial thing that everybody should be familiar with, right? The Turkish Olympics and how nationalism and jingoism, which is actually antithetical to Islam per se, is utilized there. That's a general thing, educational institution of teaching good language skills and cultural skills to children around the world. But that's besides that. Use that, whatever that thing is, as a leverage. But at the end, as people, what you get is not what you see. As these guys, from my own experience in the United States of America, what I had seen them observe, I have not been part of them. I wouldn't be. The animosity is mutual, and the distance is mutual. I find it very fallacious and very anti-Islamic not to walk the walk, but just talk the talk. Or I find it very un-Islamic to come here to a group of people and say, we are from you. And then go there and say, we are from you. as a verse clearly identifies these kind of people in Holy Quran. That is not in my book. I talk what I believe in. I live by what I believe in. I say what I believe in. So not many faces or Janus faces for that matter. So in the United States, it was the Rumi, but within them, this is a cult, very parochial, very narrow-minded, very Turkey-based, no intermingling, very Turkey-based in mentality. The wiring of the brain is very Turkish. I hope I'm able to get my message across, because I'm using Turkishness as an adjective here. You know, there's a way of thinking in a certain educational system, and if you're born in the United States, you're more prone to think in this particular way. And here, what we saw them do is that stay within their own circles, cocoons, no intermingling, like a black box, and be extra cautious. What do I mean by that? Not to scare off Americans, per se, about Islam. At the meetings of these groups, like you go in the U.S. Congress, the U.S. Congress officials sometimes give iftars in Ramadan and so forth. You're not going to see FETA members with their wives there. They will be all male. FETA members' wives, who are also FETA members, are devout Muslims with their full hijab, but they will stay home. Rather, non-FETA, non-Islamic looking women will accompany these men, not to scare off the Americans from the very sort of strong face of hijab. That is one method they utilize. At their schools, 3 minutes? Oh, that's plenty. At their schools, from my experience that my friends sent their children to the schools in the United States, the level of education, academic success was not up to par to the level of education that their schools had in other continents. In some places I've heard they were like the best schools and things, but in the United States they failed at that. They didn't get the American education system, first of all. I don't know if they even tried to get the education system there, but that's another story. But you go into their schools. I had a friend who said, Assalamu alaikum. You know, it's an Islamic school. It's a Turkish school. She wants her son to learn Islam and Turkish there. And she didn't get a response back. And she was actually responded by, we don't say Assalamu alaikum here. And she came to me and said, Merve, what's with them? What's with your Turkish friends? She's an American Muslim. And there's nothing wrong in saying Assalamu alaikum when you go into a school to your educators there. But that sort of being too cautious and too careful, not to pray, not to permit prayers. I have known women whose husbands coerced them to take off their hijab in the United States, not to give that impression that they are Orthodox Muslims. In that contextualization of good Islam and bad Islam, or good Muslim and bad Muslim, taking it from Mamdani, they went to the US officials and said, look, we are the alternative. We are the good Islam. And hijab, you can let that go. This, you can let that go. And very, very crux of Muhammadur Rasulullah, you can already let that go. At their azans, at official meetings of theirs, as they meet with the Judeo-Christian community members, you'll hear the first part of Azan, but Muhammadur Rasulullah is not there. And they find this to be very acceptable. Thank you very much.